Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Photography Masterclass here on Adobe Live, the weekly show on Fridays, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. For those of you who are new, this is Masterclass Friday, one of my favorite days of the week, and I always enjoy getting to do these because, it just kind of gives me something to focus on once a week. I know I'm going to be in front of all you lovely people, and I get to do an hour-long focus on something photography related, which usually means something Lightroom and Photoshop, but it could also mean a live shoot like we did a couple weeks ago. So if you are new to this and you are watching on various other places, like you might be watching this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you might happen to be watching this, cool, you can hang out there and watch it. But if you want to participate in the main chat where I see Nicholas, Michelle, Cheryl, Ozzy, Charles, Bobby, so forth and so on, then head over to b.net/Adobe Live. That's the main chat. That's where, that's the one window I will definitely pay attention to. I'll try and look at the other one. So I see a good morning from Meme of God, or is that, yeah, I guess that's Meme of God. Hopefully I said that correctly. And Darren just popped in on Facebook. And so YouTube and Facebook, I see your comments as well, but I may not always get a chance to pay attention to both windows. So if you want to make sure I see your question, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. All right, that's the usual housekeeping stuff that I get to do. Just know that this is a full day of master classes. So you see the various disciplines: graphic design, photography, Photoshop, UI, UX design, audio, video, and digital painting. So the evangelist here, and also Adobe Express is also, I think, a masterclass here on Fridays now, along with some daily creative challenges sprinkled in throughout the day as well. So it's just a good day, even if you can't hang out all day, which most people can't. You can at least come back and watch the replays, because if you're watching this in the future on a replay, thank you. I love replay numbers. All right, without further ado, we're going to dive right into time-saving Lightroom and Photoshop shortcuts. I've got my list right in front of me, right next to the chat, so that I don't forget anything. And it was funny when I was thinking about, okay, I came up with a title long before I came up with the content, and I was like, okay, what are time-saving shortcuts? And I'm thinking in my mind, time-saving things, tips and techniques that show you how to do something, or maybe do it a little faster and shorter. And then I was like, but shortcuts also means keyboard shortcuts. So I said, oh my God, I hope they're not coming to see a whole hour of keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to throw in some keyboard shortcuts too, because, they do save you time and they do save you from going to the menus. And a lot of these keyboard shortcuts are very hidden and you wouldn't even know they're there. Like you wouldn't even know it's a feature. So I'm going to show you some keyboard shortcuts too, but because that's what people think when they think of shortcuts, because keyboard shortcuts. All right, anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to do Lightroom first. If I don't get through the Lightroom list in 30 minutes, I'm going to stop. So I give equal time to both Lightroom and Photoshop. Lightroom, we're going to do Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. I'll show you differences where they apply. They won't always be different. So if I don't switch over to Lightroom, it means the same thing works in Lightroom. I didn't have to show it to you in both applications. But if I do switch over to Lightroom, I'm showing you in Lightroom because it's different versus Lightroom Classic. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Here's my computer. I'm in Lightroom Classic. Let's start out with some keyboard shortcuts. Many of these you probably already know if you use Lightroom Classic or if you've been using it a while, and some of these are going to be new if you're brand new to Lightroom or Lightroom Classic. So first and foremost, when you're looking at a folder or collection, like I'm looking at a collection right now, the one we did from the live shoot a couple weeks ago, I'm looking at it in what's called a grid view. So a grid view means that I'm seeing a grid of photos. I can also look at an individual particular photo. I can just click on one and hit the letter E for loop view. Don't ask me why it's a E instead of an L, because the L is something else. I'll show you what the L is for in a minute. But E takes me to loop view, and you can, of course, still use your arrow keys. So this is not something that's obvious, but you can use your arrow keys to go to the next photo. So for example, in that particular photo, I would go ahead and hit the letter X to reject it because her eyes are closed by mistake. I caught her in mid blink. So I wouldn't want to keep that photo. So I would hit the letter X And that puts a little reject flag down here in the lower left corner, maybe behind me. Oh, it's not behind me, but there it is. Lower left corner, reject, pick. And if I wanted to, by the way, let's say you rejected something by a mistake or you changed your mind. Another quick keyboard shortcut is the letter U for unflag. So U for unflag, P for pick, X for reject it. Now, remember I told you I'd switch over to Lightroom if something's different? Those have been the keyboard shortcuts for those three things for decades. But in Lightroom, one of those is different. So let's go ahead and switch over to Lightroom. And I got some pictures of Lasso here, our new puppy. All right, so if I go into, there really isn't a loop view per se because there's no library module. So hitting the letter E takes you into edit because it figures you want to edit the photo. Just like there's no develop module. So in Lightroom Classic, D would take you to this screen to develop or edit your photo. In Lightroom, E takes you here. But that's not the difference I was talking about. If I wanted to mark this as a pick flag, it was the most frustrating thing in the world because I'm so used to hitting the like muscle memory, hitting the letter P for years. It's not P in Lightroom. I forget what P does, but it's something weird, and I'm not even going to hit it. But anyway, P takes you to something else. And it's the letter Z as in Z, or Z. So Z is a pick, X is still a reject, and U is still unflagged. But I guess they decided to put the Z and the X next to each other on the keyboard. So that way the team decided that it'd be easy for you to go back and forth. I'm going to disagree, and I wish this could be P. If they ever give me editable keyboard shortcuts, that'll be the first one I change. All right, so this is Z or Z in Lightroom. It's P, as it should be, in Lightroom Classic. All right, let's switch back. Okay, so what does the L do? Since L is not like or pick, what does L do? L is lights out. So it toggles between three modes. There's lights dim. So you can kind of see, still see a little bit of the interface. And I like the L because it takes away the interface completely and just lets you concentrate on the photo. Everything is still there. Everything still works. It's just completely lights out. So that's why it's an L. And of course, hitting L again will bring it back. So it's 1, 2, 3. Lights on, lights dim, lights out. All right, next keyboard shortcut, and this is one of my favorites. This got changed along the way. It wasn't always this case. Is there a list that can be downloaded? Yeah, just search for Lightroom keyboard shortcuts. Like I'm sure there's lists. There's even one inside the application. I hit a keyboard shortcut that's supposed to bring that up, but it didn't. So it's right here. Lightroom library module shortcuts. That'll bring up your list right there. Screenshot it if you want to, and away you go. So you can bring it up right in the application, but they change the keyboard shortcut. That's why I didn't bring it up. But anyway, there's keyboard shortcut to get to this for the module you're in. So those are all the ones for the library module. Clicking it again takes it away. Oh, I didn't mean to scroll through all those, but anyway. All right. Anyway, so that's how to bring it up to answer Charlie's question. Okay, greetings, Corinna, and Google is your friend. Yes. All right. Terry, actually, Z could be beneficial. Hundreds of photos to go through, and you have your left finger on Z while your right finger's on left and right arrows. Okay, I can see that. So Bobby's making a case for it being the letter Z, because you can have your left hand on Z and X, and your right hand on the arrow keys, and I still wish it were P. But I see your point. And I agree, that could be beneficial. But God, I hope they never change it in the Lightroom Classic. I will die. All right. And I think, just like in Photoshop, I think they should ultimately let you customize your keyboard shortcuts and make your own custom set, because then they could be whatever you want them to be. So for people that like it to stay the way it is, Lightroom would keep it. People that want to change it could change it. And that's just my 2 cents on it. All right, you tried. You did. Your point was valid. It's just like you're talking about decades of me remembering what, P is and not used to Z. And again, if you're only using one of the applications, which most of you are only going to be using Lightroom Classic or only using Lightroom Desktop. So it won't be a big deal, because if you're using Lightroom Desktop, you're probably new to it and you just learned Z. So again, it's only a concern for me when I have to go between the two. It's not a concern for the vast majority of users out there. How's that, Bobby? Is that good? All right, so with that said, let's keep going. All right, so I was going to show you my next favorite one, and this one changed along the way because it wasn't always this case. So now there's a keyboard shortcut. It has been there, but it changed functionality. Hitting the letter F goes full screen. I love this. This is like a change for the better. What it used to do, and I'll show you in a few minutes, is it used to toggle the interface in different ways. But now F just goes full screen, F goes out of full screen. Why I also love this is a time saver is when you're tethering, which we did tethering when we did this shoot, the control bar that comes up that shows you your camera settings and your shutter button and all that, you could turn it off, by the way, for those of you who are new to tethering, with a Command T or Control T on Windows. And I was always doing that. But now full screen hides it anyway. So just one less step. I don't have to turn off that tethering control bar. I just go full screen. And then I see my image full screen as I'm shooting. As I take the next picture, it goes full screen. Perfect. I don't have to do anything. As soon as I come out of full screen, the tether bar is still there. I don't have to hide it or unhide it anymore. So I'd never use the Command T anymore because I don't have to. Or Control T on Windows. All right, so speaking of advanced, and by the way, let me show you the old functionality of what the F key does, and then we'll go on to speaking of advancing. So the old functionality was, and it's still here, but you hold down the Shift to get to it. So Shift F, see what it did? It hid the top menu bar there. Shift F again, hides the rest of the operating system. And then Shift F again brings the operating system and the menu bar back. So that's what F used to do. It used to just hit F 3 times. Now F is full screen. Shift F takes on that old functionality of just simply hiding the interface. So this is basically making the interface full screen instead of, or making Lightroom Classic full screen instead of making just the image full screen. Okay, so how does that work in Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic? Hitting F just goes full screen, hitting F goes back. There is no, I don't believe there is, yeah, there is no Shift F. I was going to be shocked if there was. So no Shift F in Lightroom, just F full screen, just F out. And it's really, in this case, just for viewing your image because there is no tethering in Lightroom. All right, does Lightroom have the lights out feature? Nope, it does not. So good point. I should have pointed that out because I was supposed to show you the differences between the two. So Zach just asked, does it work in Lightroom? Hitting L just takes you to linear gradient. So no, it does not. All right, going back. Let's, and so I mentioned that Shift F also is not there. All right. This is an interesting one, and it's especially interesting for Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic use. Because I don't really use this feature in Lightroom Classic as much, even though it's here. But in Lightroom, I'd use it all the time. So what I'm referring to is when you want to edit multiple photos at the same time. Time-saving feature, big time-saving feature. In other words, if you shot multiple photos and they were underexposed or overexposed or needed sharpening or whatever, you want it to just, you don't want to have to go through each one and do the exposure, sharpening, or presets or all that. You just want to select a bunch and do it all at once and be done with it. Well, you can do that with Lightroom's auto sync feature, Lightroom Classic's auto sync feature. So for example, I'll just make something drastic here. I'll select these 5 or 6 photos in a row. I'll head over to the develop module. Now, keep in mind, this is another kind of slight visual thing that you may not notice if you're new. I selected 6 photos, but Lightroom always has what's called Lightroom Classic always has the most selected photo. So something called the most selected photo out of the 2 or more that you selected. You can tell which one is the most selected photo because if you look at the background of the thumbnails, these are gray and this one's whiter. This one's lighter in color. So if I click on this photo, I didn't deselect the 6, but I made the second one the most selected or the 5th one the most selected by clicking on its thumbnail. Why is that important? It's important because the most selected photo is the one that gets edited when you go into develop. So even though you've got 5 more or 50 more or 500 more selected, when I hit the letter D for develop, it takes me into the develop and it's on the one that's the most selected. So if the 5th one had been the most selected, that's the one I'd be seeing now. The other 5 are still selected. You can see them down in the film strip, but you're seeing the one that's the most selected. Now, down here in the bottom right-hand side, there's a button I only turn on and off when I'm showing people that it's there. It's called, well, when you see it for the first time, it's going to be called sync. I can't ever think of a situation where I would not turn on auto sync. Like sync is manual, meaning that you're going to click the sync button and tell it to do the thing to the other 5 photos. Why wouldn't I do that automatically? If I selected multiple photos and I went into develop, chances are I selected multiple photos because I wanted them to all be adjusted at the same time. I don't ever know why I would ever use sync. So I always turn on auto sync. I never turn it off until I'm showing somebody what it does. All right, so auto sync is turned on. So that means that whatever I do will happen to all the photos. And I'm going to show you another keyboard shortcut. This is a Lightroom Classic keyboard shortcut. The letter V as in Victor. V as in Victor just automatically switches your photo black and white. But because I had multiple photos selected and auto sync turned on, they all became black and white. So if I go back to develop and I adjust the exposure, I bring the exposure down a little bit, make it a little darker, they all became a little darker. So this is a huge, huge, like probably the #1 time saver in Lightroom Classic is the ability to adjust multiple photos at the same time. I can't think of a better, faster, easier way to do this. Now, Lightroom doesn't have auto sync. And before Lightroom Classic had auto sync, it did what Lightroom did. So since Lightroom doesn't have auto sync, and there used to be a time when Lightroom Classic didn't do auto sync, how did you do this? How did you edit multiple photos? Well, in Lightroom Classic, and Lightroom for that matter, if you hold down, and I have to look at the keyboard shortcut because I never do this, you hold down Shift Command on Mac or PC, Shift Control, and hit the letter C, that'll bring up this screen. And it works the same way in Lightroom, where you get to tell it what to copy, meaning not the image, but what you've done to the image. So for example, if I have, and here, let me make an adjustment first. Let's go into this photo and make an adjustment. Let's make it super, super light so we can see the difference. If I go into develop, if I go back to library, letter L for library, or letter G for grid, not L, L is lights out. Letter G for grid, and I then go into Command Shift C, that brings up this setting. So I can say, only change the exposure. Don't change the white balance. Don't change shadows and highlights. Don't change anything else. Or I can say, change all of these things. I can say, select all and do everything. And everything I've done to this photo, do it to the other ones. So this lets you pick and choose what you want to paste onto the other photos. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this. And then if I select the other photos, I just use my keyboard shortcut. I guess I can't use my keyboard shortcut. Hang on. Did I do it? Hang on. Did I not do it? Hang on. Command Shift C. Copy. I don't know why my... Oh, there it goes. Okay. That was weird. It should be doing a paste of what I just did. Image. One more time. I think I did it too many times. Hold on. Let's go to Command Shift C. Copy. Let me try one. Why is my paste not working? Command Shift. Sorry. My bad. Wrong keyboard shortcut. So undo. Let me show you the rest now. I was hitting the wrong keyboard shortcut. So if you want to paste it to all, just like we did Command Shift C for copy, or PC, Control-Shift-C for copy. Normally, for paste, you would just do Command-V or PC, Control-V. But because you're pasting settings, it's Command-Shift-V as in Victor for paste. So just like you did Command-Shift-C or Control-Shift-C for copy, it would be Command-Shift-V as in Victor or Control-Shift-V as in Victor on PC for paste. That's what I was doing wrong. So user error in that case. All right, and of course you can undo all of this. I just keep hitting undo until it undoes that. All right, so luckily you have multiple undos, or you could just go into the photo and hit reset. Speaking of that, we're going to get to something along those lines in a minute. All right, we did that. And of course, let me just show it to you here real quick. So if I go out of one photo that I've done something to, I do Command-Shift-C. I get a similar window that lets me pick and choose, not as many options, but lets me pick and choose what, actually it's quite a few if you twirl them down. They're pretty much all there. But lets me pick and choose the ones that I want to copy, and then Command-Shift-V would paste. So if we go in and edit this one, and we make it super dark, just for the visual, and we go to this one, and we do Command-Shift-V. Oh, did I not do the copy first? Hang on, Command-Shift-C. I didn't do the copy first. Copy. There we go. And Command-Shift-V will do the paste. So copy-paste is the way you would edit multiple photos in Lightroom. Lightroom Classic, much simpler, much easier to do auto sync. But both can do copy-paste. And the only time I could see this being a benefit, obviously in Lightroom you have to do it this way, but the only other time I see this being a benefit is in for doing edits after the fact. So in other words, you did some editing, you moved on to the next day or so, and then you decide, hey, what I did to that photo 2 days ago, I'd love to do to these 3 photos that I just saw. So now you could just go copy and paste to those 3 photos without having to re-edit it to select them all to do a sync. So I get that as a use case for when copy and paste would be better, or not better, but beneficial to auto sync. Okay, next up. Going back, let's see. Oh, this is another favorite. So this has been both applications, so I'll show it to you here. Let's say I want to crop this photo. So, by the way, the keyboard shortcut. This is the one keyboard shortcut I would say that drives me as crazy as pick being P versus Z. In Lightroom Classic, to get to the crop tool is the letter R, as in my favorite joke, crop, letter R. Takes you to crop, and of course, in Lightroom, it's C, as you would expect crop to be the letter C. So anyway, now that you know the 2 differences in the keyboard shortcuts, what I wanted to show you here is that I don't want to crop it in the same aspect ratio. I don't want to crop it wide. I want to make a tall photo out of this. So I want to turn the crop around. So to do that in both applications, once you bring the crop up, is the letter X. So X toggles the crop, landscape versus portrait. So now that I've turned it portrait, I can move and recompose my shot. And then that's it. I have a non-destructive portrait version of that photo now that I could always go back and uncrop and redo. So crop is the letter R in Lightroom Classic, letter C in Lightroom, and X in both applications will toggle it to portrait versus white, or landscape versus portrait, or back and forth. All right, I already showed you that's new and useful to you. Great, Nicholas. And thanks for all the Instagram posts as well. Where was I going? Okay, so I showed you the letter V to switch to black and white. That is not an option. That's not a keyboard shortcut, the same in Lightroom. And this is a new one to Lightroom. I've always had this in Lightroom Classic, but I just saw it recently that Lightroom has it too. And it's creating a target collection and adding photos to it quickly. So for example, in Lightroom Classic, you have always had, or at least for years and years, you've had, excuse me, let me move over so you can see it. You've had this collection that's built in called the Quick Collection. And if yours has a plus next to it, it's already the target collection. And when this feature first came out, it was always the target collection. There was no way to change it. Now there is. But anyway, what is Quick Collection? What's a target collection? And why would you care? Because sometimes you need to gather photos together for something you're going to do, and it's temporary. Meaning, I don't need a permanent collection for these 10 photos that someone asked me for a contest or whatever, that I'm going to, once I export, I'm done. So I want to gather them together, export them, and then forget that organization. They don't need to be together anymore. So that's what the Quick Collection was always designed for, is not a permanent collection, quickly adding photos to a collection. And if I were to go to it, those are the photos that are in it now. All right. But anyway, if I were to take this photo and I say, hey, I would like to share these with somebody, I can hit the letter, but I want to share some other ones too. I can hit the letter B as in boy, and that will, you see a little thing came up that said add it to the Quick Collection, because the Quick Collection is currently the target collection. So now they're there. Great. And if I go to a different collection, how did I do that in Lightroom, for example, and I want to add these to it, hit the letter B, boom, they're there. So basically, I can just quickly gather photos that I want to put together for some reason, and then export them out or adjust them or do whatever, and they're not moved from their folders ever. And if I ever don't need these in the Quick Collection anymore, I can just select them all, hit the letter B, and they're out of the Quick Collection. So Quick Collection is temporary, target, it's a target collection by default, hit the letter B, they go in there. Hit the letter B again, they come out. They're not moved from any other collection. They're not moved from your folders. It's just a temporary thing for organization, for usually something you're going to do to them. Okay. What changed along the way is that any collection can be a target collection. Doesn't have to be the Quick Collection. So if I were to say my Finding Images class that we did, there's 97 photos in it. If I were to right click on it and I were to say set as target collection, it will get the plus sign now. And that means that hitting the letter B on any image will put the images in here. And of course, hitting the letter B again will take them out. So any collection can be a target collection at any time. So for example, if I were to now go down and see some of these and I say, hey, I really like this photo, I edit it, hit the letter B, it goes into the Finding Images collection. So there it is at the very bottom of the Finding Images collection. So basically, think of a target collection as you're doing, and it could be a permanent collection now. So it could be a permanent collection you just made saying my Hawaii favorites. And then you just go through all your Hawaii photos, B, 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 and they're all in your Hawaii favorites. Quickly and easy without having to drag them. Okay. That feature wasn't always in Lightroom. Now it is. So if I head over to Lightroom, and of course it's a different keyboard shortcut, as you might expect, I created an album called Quick Album. So it doesn't have one by default. I just made one called Quick Album. Yep, let me zoom out. There it is. And my Quick Album has 0 photos in it. And it's right now probably not the target collection or target album. So if I say set, hang on, let me get out of your way. If I right click on it, set Quick Album as the target album. So same thing as set it as the Quick Collection or a target collection. So now it doesn't put a plus sign next to it. It just outlines it with this black border around it. So it's just subtle, but now you know that's your target collection. So if I were to take these 2 shots, I like them, hit the letter T, it puts them in the Quick Album. So Lightroom is the letter T, Lightroom Classic is the letter B as in Bravo, letter T as in Terry in Lightroom, and you basically set them up the same way, right click, set it as the target collection or target album in this case, and you just use a different keyboard shortcut to put images in or out of it. So now this album has those 2 photos in it, and away you go. All right. When you make edits to a photo inside of a collection, those edits are also made in the original photo outside of a collection. Great question, Wade. Wade's saying, or has basically found a question on YouTube, our moderator here saying, hey, when I make a change to a photo, so for example, I take this particular photo of Lasso, I go in and edit it. I, by the way, just threw this in a quick album. So if I go in and I say that I want to really bring down the temperature of this photo, kind of make it, or bring it up, make it really warm, did that change, that edit happen in the other collection or the other folder or the other album or the other whatever? The answer is yes. Making a change to a photo always makes the change to the photo everywhere the photo is. So if I were to go find that photo again, I think it's in here, I think it's in here, and there it is. So that photo got the same warm treatment no matter where it is. So the photo is the photo, no matter how many albums or collections it's in, no matter what folder it's in, because it's only going to be in one folder, and no matter how many collections or albums you've added it to, making the edit anywhere makes the edit everywhere. So that's the answer to that question. Okay. And I think we're out of time, and we are done. One more thing, real quick. We are out of time for Lightroom. Let's go back and do one more Lightroom thing, or 2 more Lightroom things really quickly. And this is one that let's go into develop. This is one I normally have on, and I have it on by default. Notice that when I'm in develop, let me get out of your way, that right now we're looking at the basic panel, the basic treatment panel. Everything else is collapsed. If I go to lens corrections, notice that basic got collapsed. That is called solo mode. What that's designed to do is you're usually only working on one panel at a time. So rather than have this long scrolling list of panels and options that you would have to constantly scroll up and down to get to, you can go to solo mode. And what solo mode is, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to hit 1. Solo mode is simply right click and turning it on or off. So I right clicked on the name of one of the panels and it's enabled. So unchecking it would be disabled. So if I uncheck it, then that means transform, and when I open transform, it does not close lens correction. But having it on means that one or the other will be open, but not both. So I prefer working in solo mode because, like I said, I don't have many options or many opportunities where I need 2 panels open at the same time. I'm usually working in one or the other or the other or the other. All right, so that's one. And then the last one is, and this is a big one, I can't stress this enough. When you're done working on your image in Lightroom Classic, and this is a big time saver, God, I couldn't imagine working without these. You usually want to export it. You usually want to do something with it. You either want to export it for social media, you want to print it, you want to share it, you want to send it to somebody, you want to do something, you want to post it on your website. You want to do something with the photo. And chances are that something you want to do is something you're going to do over and over again. I'm always going to post images to Instagram. I'm going to always put images on a website. I'm always going to email images, so forth and so on. So if you're working on a giant PSD, TIFF file, RAW file, chances are that's not the one you want to share. You want to share a smaller JPEG version of it. So usually that means you would do an export. So if you do an export, you would go in and change all your settings to what you wanted it to be. So in this case, I'm going to say, put it out on the desktop, put it in a folder called Masterclass. Okay, great. And don't rename it. Change it to a JPEG. Change the quality up to 100%. Change the color space to sRGB. Resize it because I don't need the full resolution, the full dimension of it. Resize it down to 1080, which is what, last time I checked, that's what Instagram wants. Don't include all the metadata. Just include my copyright and contact info. I don't want the serial number for my camera and all that stuff going into the photo. And you could say add a watermark just for giggles. So add a watermark, my TWP watermark at 70%. Great. And then when you're done, show it to me in the Finder. And now click export. Well, the next time I want to do that, I don't want to do that over and I don't have to change all those settings over and over again. So the second biggest time saver I can give you other than auto sync is create presets everywhere, but especially export presets. So when you choose, when you set it all up the way you want, then you can go ahead over here on the left-hand side before you use it and say add. And when you add, you can name it as a preset. So I can say for IG Instagram Masterclass. Let's just call it that so I know which one that one is. So now when I click create, it'll create it in the user presets. You can make a new folder. So I'll make a new folder called Masterclass. Great. So that way it's not mixed in with all my usual ones. Great. Let's create that new folder. Let's put it there and done. So now if I were to scroll up, there it is for Instagram Masterclass. Now I'm going to do the export. Done. And there it is. And there it is with my watermark and ready to go. So the next time I need to do this, let's go back to Lightroom Classic. Let's choose these three. And let's go File, Export. Instead of me choosing Export and choosing the options all over again, I'm going to say Export with Preset, Masterclass for Instagram Masterclass. Done. And they're all three photos with the watermarks ready to go. Those are unretouched, unedited, but there they are ready to go. All right, so Lightroom Classic presets for exporting are huge. Now you don't quite have presets in Lightroom, unfortunately, but you do have something that's almost as good. Let's say I select a photo and I choose to export. These are my choices. I don't have a preset, but I do have custom settings where I get to tell it what I want. I have some preset. I do have some built-in presets. JPEG small, JPEG large, and most people will find that those are all they need. Original size, but here's the next best thing. Export with previous settings, meaning whatever I did last, just do that again. So if you did custom and you want to keep using that same one that you just did, just use previous. Now, of course, that's going to change the next time you change the settings, then the previous will be different. But at least you have something. And like I said, the vast majority, like most of the time, I'm either doing JPEG small or large out of Lightroom anyway. So I don't really need to use custom. But if I do, I can. And if I need to do it over again, I just use previous. All right. That is that. Let's go to Photoshop. Yeah, let's go to Photoshop. All right. Here we are in Photoshop. We just saw an image like this. And one of my first favorite time savers and things that you should know about Photoshop is, and this is of course no particular order. So when I say first, I'm meaning not the best or my top tip, but it's the first one that came to mind. And that is, we're used to doing all that non-destructive editing in Lightroom. But when you come to Photoshop, a lot of those adjustments will be destructive, meaning if you're not careful of how you use Photoshop, Photoshop can be very destructive. You erase something, it's erased. You save it, it's gone. So it's learning how to work around the 35-year plus old application that did a lot of destructive things from the very beginning. What's my most used keyboard shortcut in Lightroom is probably, it literally is probably D for develop and G for grid, because those are the two I'm going back and forth between the most, Lightroom Classic. In Photoshop, my most commonly used keyboard shortcut is Command D for deselect. So I wasn't going to show that one, but since you're asking, I don't know where you were asking, here or back in Lightroom. Now you know. Okay, anyway, so to keep Photoshop from being destructive, there are a lot of little things you can do now along the way. For example, I want to make the same kind of adjustments I would make in Lightroom non-destructively. So Lightroom or Photoshop has a filter. It's been here for a while now, called the Camera Raw filter. And when you bring up the Camera Raw filter, which popped up in my other monitor here, it looks very much like Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. It's got the same exact settings. However, if I go do something like, let's select, what do I want to do? Let's select subject. And let's invert that. And I always have to look for the invert button because it's always different. But anyway, I do the invert. And then I go in and I say, hey, I would love to change the exposure of that background, make the background brighter. Great. And now I click OK. Well, notice that that actually did it. That's a permanent change to the background. If I don't undo it, and if I save it right now, there's no coming back from that unless I do it manually over again. And there's no real way of coming back from that because darkening it would just may not be the exact same effect as lightening it. So undo before we make it permanent. And just always remember, whenever possible in using filters, always do this first. Convert for smart filters. Because what that will do is that will convert the layer or background, in this case, to a layer, and it will convert it to a smart object. So now we can see we can tell in the lower right-hand corner, it's got the smart object icon letting me know. Andrew is here and on Adobe Live. Andrew, welcome. Andrew, by the way, Andrew Kavanaugh does a great group on Facebook for Photoshop tips and tricks and photography tips and tricks as well. So you guys should follow Andrew. Anyway, so now that I've done that, now that I've converted that to a smart object using the convert for smart filters, now I can go in and I can use the camera raw filter. And it's just as non-destructive as it is in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. So no matter what I do, if I go in and do that same thing, select subject and invert it and lighten up the background. Let's say I lighten it that much and I click OK. Now notice the difference. It adds it to the layer as this whole smart object section down here underneath what we just did. Now that lets me do a couple of things. Number one, it's not permanent. So if I ever decide I don't want this, I can just turn it off back to normal because it didn't do it permanently, just like it would in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. If I ever decide that lightening it wasn't enough or it was too much, this is the best part. You get to change it. You don't have to start over. You don't have to delete it and start over and do it again. You just double click on the camera raw filter that you ran. And now you can go in and you can say, oh, you know, that exposure I did on the whole mask background thing, that wasn't bright enough. Let's make it brighter now. And let's click OK. And now that becomes the new adjustment non-destructively. And also, you only need to do that convert for smart filters once, because now that it's been converted, if you run a different filter, so let's say I go and I do a Gaussian blur. And of course, we don't want to blur her, but let's say I bring that up. And I wasn't paying attention. I click OK, and I was like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to select the background first and blur the background, blah, blah, blah. So then you could go in, you could just turn that off or delete it or go back in it and change the settings, whatever you want. So that way you get to always come back and fix things or change your mind if you did something you weren't supposed to do on a layer. So let's delete that smart filter. There we go. And that filter is now gone. So Gaussian blur is gone, but the camera raw is still there. And you can even, by the way, here's a bonus tip. You can even change the stacking if one affects the other. You can rearrange the filters. There's not too many situations I've run into where that would matter, but there are times where it might, because something's on top of another thing. You can rearrange the order of the filters so that they affect the image differently. Okay, next up. This is another one that is, I got an image open here for it. This is another kind of introduced in the last, I don't know, 5 years maybe. You have a properties panel. And in your properties panel, which is fairly new, there are options depending on the state of the image. So in other words, there's an option normally for remove background, and I don't see it. Why is it there? So you're welcome. Is it Vishnu Reddy from South Africa? Thank you for joining us, and hope you can come back and catch the replay. Can you paint a smart filter like you do a mask? No, you can't paint a smart filter, but you can apply a mask. So yeah, so two different things. All right, so you can apply a mask and paint the mask, but you can't paint on the smart filter. All right, anyway, coming back to this. Properties panel is missing an option that I know is there. Like, where is remove background? Remove background's not there. How come I don't see it? Because the state of the image doesn't allow it, because you can't remove the background of a background layer. It has to be a layer. So in order to get that option to show up, watch what I'm going to do. I'm just going to click the little lock icon next to the layer, and boom, remove background now shows up as a choice because it's a background. So, by the way, Photoshop team, I know that. These people know that now. Most people will not know that, and they'll just never know that that feature's there. I think remove background should be there no matter what. And when you click it, if it's still a background, it says, I'm going to convert this to a layer. You okay with that? Yes. Convert it to a layer, remove background. My 2 cents. All right. Anyway, now when I click remove background, it does just that, especially since it's non-destructive. Photoshop team, why not let it do this? Because it's doing it as a mask. It's not throwing away the background. It's not deleting the background. It's not removing pixels. It's doing it very non-destructively. So it's doing it as a mask. Don't hide it. Like, just tell people what it's going to do if they click the button. All right. And that way, let me turn that off, by the way. I don't want it to keep telling me. Anyway, that's my contribution to Photoshop, next version. All right, next up. So that remove background is a very quick, useful feature. And the reason why I like the way it does it now that it's done is because it does it as a mask. So you got to remember, it's using AI to remove the background. Select subject, mask. That's all it's doing. But that doesn't mean it's always going to do it perfectly like it did in this case. So if it missed something or didn't select something, then in that case, you still have the mask to go in and paint and adjust what it missed. So for example, here, it did actually cut into his cheek a little bit. I just saw this. So here, actually it didn't. But let's say this was cut into his cheek and I wanted to put that back. I can go to the mask. I can go to a paintbrush. Oh, we get to see some keyboard shortcuts. All right, I need to make my brush smaller. It's too big. So number one, you have on a US keyboard, because I learned this by touring overseas, people would say, what bracket keys? What are you talking about? On a US keyboard, next to the letter P, you've got 2 brackets. You've got a left bracket, which makes your brush smaller. You've got a right bracket, which makes your brush bigger. We're going to see something cooler than that in a minute. But anyway, I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I want to paint with white to unmask this little spot back. So my foreground color over there next to me there is black. I need it to be white. So another keyboard shortcut to toggle your foreground color, your foreground background, to toggle it, letter X. And by the way, let's say it wasn't black and white. Let's say it was some other color. D for default, then X to flip it. So now I can go ahead and paint. And yeah, it wasn't his cheek, but let's say it was. I can put his cheek back like that, even though that's actually putting back part of the background. But that's how I would unmask a bad remove background. It wasn't a bad remove background. It just looked like it was. Okay, next up. All right, Steve's asking an interesting question. All right, Steve's saying, hey, Terry, is there any danger of making a layer a smart object the minute it's imported? Why would it not be automatic from the start? Because it is restrictive. There are times where I need to do things and I'm okay with, I know what I'm doing. I'm okay with it being destructive. Like, for example, if I need to retouch, I don't, but let's say I need to retouch the hairs on the back of his neck. Well, if it were a smart object, I couldn't, because the smart object's protecting it. It's not going to let me paint and remove pixels. So that would annoy me if every time I opened up an image, it was a smart object and I had to dig into the smart object to do things I wanted to do. That's why it's not on by default. So for example, if I were to go in here now and I were to use my healing brush and make my brush smaller, because I can do that. But if it were a smart object, I couldn't. So if we go convert this to a smart filter layer now. All right, there, it's done. So let's say that happened by default. Now I'm going to be getting this little no symbol all the time, because anytime I'm trying to do something that it doesn't think I should be able to do, because it's protecting that layer, I'm going to get this. So this would be more confusing for most people, that they can't use the tools when they want to, than protecting it all the time. I'd rather have the choice. So that's why it's not on by default. All right. Now, let's say I did want to go and retouch that hair one more time while it's a smart object. Here's the workaround for that. If you double click on a smart object layer, that will take you into, that will drill down into the smart object so you can get to the actual pixels. So if I were to go in here now and I were to remove another hair, I am making this destructive, meaning those pixels are now altered, and that pixel's altered, and it starts becoming anyway. start getting really into it. Anyway, those pixels are forever changed at this point. So when I close this, it'll ask me, do you want to save it? Yes. And now it's back to the smart object, and those pixels are gone. So you can edit a smart object if you drill into it, but I would prefer not to have to do that every single time, and let me convert it to a smart object when I want to. So that's my reason for why it's not on by default, and I would not want it to be. All right, next up. Ooh, this is a fun one. Let me go find this one. The image I want to use for this should be here. It's a guy. Maybe he's up here. It's another guy. All right, there's an example I've seen used many times, and I want to show you how this is done. Oh, we're going to use this one too. Let me go ahead and get this one open. That's not the one I want to use for this though. Oh my God, I don't believe I don't have this guy here. Let me see if it's in my recents. It is not. All right, hang on. I just need to go find this one image. Cancel. This one image here. Maybe it's in here. Oh yeah, it's it. I think it's in this one. Wrong library. That one will work. Here it is. Okay. Now I want to convert this image to a banner. And as you know, like your Twitter banners, your Facebook, YouTube banners are super wide. Well, I use YouTube and Twitter are super wide. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all use the crop tool, because let it be known that the crop tool can actually uncrop. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want this to be super wide. All right. Now that I've done that, that converts it to a layer by default automatically. I need this to be this wide. Now, let's say I measured the exact dimensions and got it exactly as wide as I need to be. I just fudged it. But let's say I did. So now if I free transform this and hold on, and I stretch this out, well, that's what it looks like. It looks stretched. So let's not do that. Instead, let's use content-aware scale. But content-aware scale has a hidden feature. Even if I use content-aware scale and I stretch it out, it may or may not work. Like, see, for example, it may or may not work right. Putting his hands closer together, making them further. So that's not what we want. So what we're going to do instead, let's escape out of that for a second. We're going to use select subject. Select subject. That will select him. Great. So now he's got the marching ants around him. He's selected. And what I'm going to do first before I do that content-aware scale is I'm going to save the selection. So when I save the selection, that will create a mask of what we just said. And I'm just going to call this dude. All right, so now we saved a selection called dude. We can deselect now, Command D. All right, so now that we deselect it, now I can use content-aware scale, because content-aware scale has an option that says protect. What selection do you want to protect? I want to protect the dude we just made. So now that I protected that, we're going to go ahead and hold down our shift key so we can stretch it without scaling. We're going to hold down the option key so it does it from the center out. And now we can scale the background without touching our dude. Our dude is protected. We can make a nice content-aware scale of the background without affecting the content, the subject. All right, so that is that is another one of those. I only have like a minute left, so I'm just trying to find something I can do quickly in this minute. All right, let's go back to this one for a minute. Oh yeah, this one. All right, this is cool. So I'm gonna do this one quickly. Follow along. You can always replay it, pause it, whatever. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna select subject, because I only have like a minute. Select subject, that selects her. Command J puts it on its own layer, PC Control J. I'm gonna duplicate the background so that we have the original to go back to. And I'm going to just simply sample the background color and fill the background. So now, and I know I got rid of the shadow. I would do that, fix that in a minute. So now we have that on its own. I want her leg to be a little bit closer to her. So I want her kick to be more extreme. So simply go in and choose Puppet Warp. And then we're gonna put down some pins. We're gonna put down a pin on where we wanna move her foot, her knee, her thigh, so that she doesn't move, so that this leg doesn't move, so that this leg doesn't move. Even though we're not gonna move those parts, I'm putting the pins down to keep them in place. All right, so now that we got this one pin, we can now move her leg back over here, and you can put one on the actual leg and kind of bend it and twist it a little bit more, like so. And the reason we had to fill in the background first is so that the background would not show the original leg, because we duplicated her onto her own background. Now I would go do the shadows using another trick that I don't have time for. But that is my time for today. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Hopefully you had some fun watching me use some random examples. Cheers, everybody. Stay tuned for the Daily Creative Challenge. Bye, everybody.